The summer breeze carried the scent of grilled burgers, smoky charcoal, and freshly cut grass through the backyard of a cozy suburban home in Boise, Idaho, where Ethan Carter first laid eyes on Claire Monroe during a lively 4th of July barbecue at his friend Derek's place. It was the kind of gathering where kids ran through sprinklers, their laughter echoing over the hum of a country playlist, and adults sipped tart lemonade under a canopy of red, white, and blue streamers fluttering in the warm July air. Ethan, a 40-year-old electrician with a small but growing business, stood by the cooler in a faded denim shirt, his sandy blonde hair catching the golden sunlight, his blue eyes scanning the crowd with a quiet curiosity. Claire walked in, her auburn hair tied in a loose ponytail that swayed with each step, her green eyes sparkling with a playful, magnetic energy. Wearing a white sundress with tiny daisies embroidered along the hem, the fabric catching the breeze as she moved. She laughed at something Derek said, her voice like a melody that cut through the chatter, and Ethan couldn't look away, his heart skipping a beat as if the world had slowed just for her. "You're staring," she teased, catching him mid-sip of his soda, a grin spreading across her freckled face as she tilted her head. "Caught me," he admitted, his cheeks flushing a deep red as he set the can down on the picnic table. "But you're making it hard not to. You're like a walking ray of sunshine." Her laugh was infectious, a sound that felt like summer itself, and by the end of the night, they were sitting on a checkered picnic blanket, sharing stories under a sky lit by bursts of fireworks, the colors reflecting in her eyes as Ethan felt something shift inside him, a certainty that this woman was his future. 6 months later, Ethan proposed at a local pumpkin patch during a crisp October evening, the air thick with the scent of hay and cinnamon from nearby cider stands, the ring hidden inside a carved jack-o'-lantern that glowed softly in the twilight. Claire said yes, tears streaming down her cheeks as she threw her arms around him, the crowd around them cheering as they kissed amidst the golden autumn leaves. They married the following spring in a small church on the outskirts of Boise, surrounded by family and friends, with wildflowers lining the aisle and the scent of lilacs in the air. They bought a fixer-upper in a quiet Boise neighborhood, a 2-story Craftsman with a wraparound porch and creaky wooden floors, dreaming of filling it with kids and memories that would last a lifetime. Ethan poured his heart into his business, Carter Electric, working long hours to provide for their future, often coming home with sawdust on his jeans and a tired but proud smile on his face. Claire, a freelance graphic designer, brought warmth to their home with her creativity, painting whimsical murals on the nursery walls even though kids never came, a silent ache they both learned to live with after countless doctor visits and whispered disappointments. The early years were a whirlwind of joy, Claire surprising Ethan with homemade apple pies after late nights on the job, the crust golden and flaky, the filling tart and sweet, just the way he liked it. Ethan taking her to the Boise River Festival to dance under the stars, their bodies swaying to a local band's cover of a classic love song, their laughter echoing through the crowd as the river shimmered nearby. They celebrated every milestone together, Ethan landing his first big contract with a local school district, the deal that put Carter Electric on the map, Claire winning a design award for a community project that brought art to underprivileged kids. On their 5th anniversary, Ethan gifted her a silver necklace with a tiny emerald pendant, her birthstone, the gem catching the light as she wore it proudly, and they spent the weekend camping in the Sawtooth Mountains, whispering promises of forever by a crackling fire, the stars above them stretching endlessly across the Idaho sky. Life felt perfect, a canvas painted with love, trust, and shared dreams. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming, ones Ethan wouldn't see until it was too late. Claire started pulling away, her once vibrant energy dimming like a candle flickering in the wind, her excuses growing flimsier, late nights at client meetings, sudden weekend trips with friends Ethan had never met. Ethan, too caught up in building their dream, didn't notice the storm brewing on the horizon, the subtle shift in her smile, the way her eyes no longer met his with the same warmth, a storm that would soon shatter the life he thought they'd built together. The kitchen of their Boise Craftsman home glowed softly under the warm light of a pendant lamp, the faint aroma of Claire's chamomile tea lingering in the air as Ethan sat at the counter, his sandy blonde hair disheveled after a long day, his blue eyes tracing the grain of the wooden surface. It was a late September evening, the kind where the air outside carried the first chill of fall, and Ethan had just returned from a grueling 12-hour shift wiring a new community center downtown. Claire stood by the sink, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, her green eyes fixed on her phone, her fingers tapping rapidly as a faint smile played on her lips, a smile that felt private, not meant for him. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, his voice casual but laced with a quiet unease, noticing how she'd been glued to her phone more often lately. "Yeah, just a client," Claire replied without looking up, her tone clipped, the smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Ethan nodded, but the unease grew, a seed of doubt taking root in his chest. Over the past few months, Claire had changed in ways he couldn't ignore. Small things at first, like how she stopped asking about his day, her once warm hugs replaced by distracted pecks on the cheek, her laughter no longer filling their home. She started going to bed early, claiming exhaustion from her design projects, but Ethan would hear the faint buzz of her phone late into the night, her silhouette illuminated by the screen as she texted someone in the dark. Then came the late nights, girls' trips to Sun Valley that seemed to happen every other weekend. Names of friends Ethan had never met, like Megan or Tessa, thrown into conversations with a casualness that felt rehearsed. New clothes appeared in her closet, sleek dresses and lacy tops she never wore around him, outfits that seemed meant for someone else's eyes. One evening, Ethan planned a surprise date for their 8th anniversary, booking a table at their favorite Italian spot, Bella Vita, where they'd shared their first date years ago. He'd even bought a bouquet of daisies, her favorite, and waited at the restaurant, his heart light with anticipation. But Claire never showed. At 9:15 p.m., she texted, "So sorry. Babe, Megan had a work crisis. Had to stay with her." Rain check. Ethan sat alone at the candlelit table, the daisies wilting in his hand, watching couples around him laugh and clink glasses while his pasta grew cold. When Claire came home past midnight, her auburn hair smelled faintly of a cologne that wasn't his, a sharp, musky scent that hit him like a punch. "How's Megan?" he asked from the living room, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him, the bouquet still clutched in his hand. Claire jumped, her green eyes wide for a moment before she recovered. "Oh, she's okay now, just a rough night." But her hand went to her neck, a nervous tick Ethan had never noticed before, and her excuse felt hollow, like a line from a script she hadn't rehearsed well enough. That was the moment Ethan knew something was wrong, but he swallowed his pride, set the daisies on the coffee table, and went to bed alone, the scent of that cologne lingering in his mind like a ghost. A week later, while sorting laundry in their basement, Ethan found a crumpled receipt in the pocket of Claire's jacket. A bill from the Sun Valley Lodge, dated last Thursday, the same day she told him she was working late on a logo design for a client. The receipt listed a bottle of Pinot Noir, a couple's massage, and a late checkout, with a handwritten note at the bottom. "Hope you enjoyed your stay, lovebirds." Ethan's stomach churned, his hands trembling as he read the words, the timestamp, 8:42 p.m., burning into his memory. Claire had texted him at 8:30 that night, saying she was still at her desk, swamped with revisions. The lie was so blatant it felt like a slap, and Ethan stood there in the dim basement, the hum of the washing machine the only sound, realizing that the woman he'd loved for nearly a decade was slipping away, her secrets unraveling thread by thread, and he was the last to know. The living room of their Boise Craftsman home was bathed in the soft glow of a single-floor lamp, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors as Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, his sandy blonde hair still damp from a shower after a long day at a construction site. It was a chilly October evening, the kind where the wind howled through the trees outside, rattling the windows, and the faint scent of rain lingered in the air. Ethan, now 41, had spent the day wiring a new library downtown, his hands calloused from years of hard work, his blue eyes heavy with exhaustion but sharp with the weight of what he'd uncovered about Claire over the past week. Claire stood across the room, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes darting nervously as she twisted the emerald pendant on her necklace, the one Ethan had given her for their 5th anniversary, a symbol of a love he now questioned. She'd been home earlier than usual, her movements jittery, her usual excuses replaced by a tense silence that filled the house like a storm cloud. Ethan sipped a glass of water, his throat dry, his mind racing with the image of the Sun Valley Lodge receipt, the cologne on her hair, the lies that had unraveled like a cheap sweater. "Ethan, we need to talk," Claire finally said, her voice trembling slightly as she crossed her arms, her posture defensive, as if bracing for a fight. Ethan set the glass down on the coffee table with a deliberate slowness, his gaze locking onto hers, steady and unyielding. "So talk," he said, his tone calm but edged with a quiet intensity that made the air between them crackle. Claire took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her arms, and then the words came, sharp and final, like a guillotine dropping. "I think we should get a divorce." The room seemed to freeze, the sound of the wind outside the only thing breaking the silence. But Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't let the hurt that clawed at his chest show on his face. Instead, he did something that shattered Claire's carefully rehearsed script. He smiled. A slow, genuine smile that started at the corners of his mouth and reached his blue eyes. A smile that spoke of relief, not pain. "Okay," he said simply, his voice as steady as the foundation of the house he'd built for them. A house that now felt like a hollow shell. Claire blinked, her mouth parting in shock, her green eyes wide with disbelief. "Okay?" she echoed, her voice rising, a mix of confusion and frustration. "That's all you have to say? You're not even going to ask why?" Ethan leaned back against the couch, his smile fading into a look of quiet resolve, his hands resting on his knees as he met her gaze head-on. "I don't need to ask why, Claire. I already know. His name's Nathan, isn't it? The guy with the silver Jeep I've seen parked outside your client meetings at the coffee shop on Main Street. The one you've been meeting at Sun Valley Lodge when you said you were working late. I know enough." The color drained from Claire's face, her hands dropping to her sides as if the weight of his words had knocked the air out of her. You knew?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, her green eyes glistening with a mix of fear and guilt. Ethan stood, his 6 feet 2 inches frame towering over her, not in anger but in a quiet, unshakable strength that made her take a step back. "I've known for a while," he said, his voice low, each word deliberate. "I found the receipt. I smelled his cologne on you. I saw the way you've been pulling away, lying to my face while I was out there breaking my back to build a life for us. So yeah, if you want a divorce, you've got it. There's the door." Claire's hands trembled, her script completely derailed, her plan to paint him as the desperate, heartbroken husband crumbling before her eyes. "Wait, what about the house? Our savings? You can't just walk away like this?" she said, her voice rising with panic, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something to hold on to. Ethan's smile returned, but this time it was colder, sharper. A smile that cut through her desperation like a knife. "Walk away? Claire, I'm not the one walking away, you are. But don't think for a second you're taking what I've built. I've already talked to my lawyer. Carter Electric, this house, everything I've worked for, it's protected. You wanted out and now you're out. But you're not taking my life with you." He turned toward the hallway, heading for the stairs, but paused at the doorway, looking back at her one last time. "You thought I'd beg, didn't you? That I'd fall apart? Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm done being the fool in your story." Claire stood frozen, her green eyes brimming with tears, her hands clenched into fists as the reality of her choices crashed down around her. The man she thought she could control now standing taller than ever, his strength a mirror to her own unraveling. The morning after Claire's bombshell divorce request, the Boise sky was a heavy gray, the kind of overcast that mirrored the storm brewing inside Ethan Carter as he stood in their bedroom. The air thick with the scent of Claire's lavender perfume, a scent that now felt like a cruel reminder of the life they'd once shared. Ethan, now 41, his sandy blonde hair tousled from a sleepless night, his blue eyes sharp with determination, stared at the empty side of the bed where Claire had slept, or rather, pretended to sleep, for years. She'd left for her design studio at dawn, her auburn hair pulled back in a hurried ponytail, her green eyes avoiding his as she muttered something about a deadline and rushed out the door, leaving Ethan alone with the echoes of her words. I think we should get a divorce. But Ethan wasn't the kind of man to let betrayal unravel him. 20 years as an electrician, running Carter Electric through economic downturns and cutthroat competition, had taught him to think 3 steps ahead, to build foundations that couldn't be shaken. He'd already suspected Claire's affair with Nathan, the man with the silver Jeep, but now he needed proof. Not for revenge, but to protect what he'd built with his own hands. He started in their bedroom, his work boots leaving faint dust marks on the hardwood floor as he opened Claire's nightstand drawer, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and resolve. There, beneath a pile of her silk scarves, was a burner phone, a cheap flip model that screamed secrecy. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened it. No password, a rookie mistake, and scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger to the life he thought they'd had. Can't wait to see you at Sun Valley again, babe. Nathan had written 2 weeks ago, followed by a string of heart emojis. Once the divorce is done, we'll move to Seattle. New life, new us? Claire had replied, her words cold and calculated, as if Ethan were nothing more than a stepping stone to her next chapter. There were photos too, selfies of Claire and Nathan at a vineyard, her arms around his neck, his lips on her cheek, and receipts for plane tickets to Seattle, hotel bookings, and even a lease agreement for an apartment in Capitol Hill, all dated within the last 6 months. The most damning messages were about money. Ethan doesn't suspect a thing, Claire had texted. Once I file, I'll push for half of Carter Electric. It's worth at least $1 million now. Ethan's blood boiled, his jaw clenching as he read her plan to take the business he'd poured his life into. The business that had paid for her car, her designer clothes, their home. He photographed every message, every receipt, his hands steady despite the rage simmering beneath his skin, then placed the phone back exactly as he'd found it, his mind already racing with what came next. Downstairs in Claire's home office, a small room filled with her design sketches and mood boards, Ethan found more evidence in the shredder bin. Torn pieces of bank statements he painstakingly pieced together on the dining table, his fingers stained with ink as he worked. The statements revealed transfers totaling $15,000 to an account he didn't recognize. Money siphoned from their joint savings over the past year. Money he'd earned while Claire was planning her exit. By noon, Ethan was on the phone with his business partner, Mark, his voice calm but firm. Remember that buyout clause we added to Carter Electric's partnership agreement a few years back? He asked, staring out the window at the rain now falling in sheets. I need to activate it today. Mark's voice was laced with concern. Everything okay, Ethan? It will be, Ethan replied, his tone resolute. I just need to make sure the business is untouchable. Within hours, Ethan had moved all his personal assets to new accounts, secured his ownership stake in Carter Electric, and transferred the house title, already in his name thanks to a refinancing Claire had signed without reading the fine print, into a trust. He called his lawyer, Rachel Bennett, a no-nonsense woman who'd helped him navigate contracts for years. I need everything locked down, Rachel, he said, his voice steady as he stood in the garage, surrounded by tools that had built his life. My wife's coming for what's mine, but she's not getting a dime. Rachel didn't ask questions. She knew Ethan well enough to trust his instincts. By the time Claire returned home that evening, her auburn hair damp from the rain, her green eyes flickering with a mix of guilt and defiance, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of documents in front of him, his blue eyes cold as steel. What's this? Claire asked, her voice sharp as she dropped her bag on the counter, noticing the tension in the air. Ethan slid a folder across the table, his gaze never leaving hers. That's your future, Claire, or what's left of it. I found your burner phone, your plans with Nathan, the transfers you made behind my back. You thought you could take half of Carter Electric, half of everything I've built, but you're too late. It's all protected now. Claire's face went pale, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as the reality of her failed plan hit her like a freight train, her green eyes wide with a fear she couldn't hide, while Ethan sat there, unshaken, a man who just turned her betrayal into his fortress. The sterile conference room in Rachel Bennett's downtown Boise law office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the late October light filtering through the blinds in thin, golden stripes across the mahogany table where Ethan Carter sat, his sandy blonde hair neatly combed, his blue eyes cold and focused. At 41, Ethan had the weathered look of a man who'd spent decades working with his hands. But today, in a crisp navy button-down and jeans, he carried the quiet authority of someone who'd already won the battle before it began. Across from him sat Rachel, her sharp gray suit a stark contrast to the tension in the room, flipping through a folder of evidence Ethan had provided. The burner phone messages, the bank statements, the Sun Valley Lodge receipts. All meticulously documented, a damning portrait of Claire's betrayal. Claire and her lawyer, a polished woman named Margaret Evans, entered the room 10 minutes late, Claire's auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun, her green eyes darting nervously as she adjusted the collar of her cream blouse. A blouse Ethan recognized from their early years, now a bitter reminder of what they'd lost. Margaret, with her sleek black blazer and practiced smile, launched into her opening salvo without hesitation. Ms. Monroe is seeking an equitable division of marital assets, she said, her voice smooth as she slid a document across the table, including the family home, joint savings, and a 50% interest in Carter Electric, valued at approximately $1 million. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch, his gaze steady as Rachel opened her folder, her expression unreadable. "Before we proceed," Rachel said, her tone calm but cutting, "you might want to review these." She pushed the evidence across the table, screenshots of Claire's texts with Nathan planning to siphon Ethan's assets. The bank transfers, the receipts for their secret getaways. Margaret's professional facade cracked as she flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing with each damning detail, while Claire's face drained of color, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her green eyes wide with a mix of shame and panic. This changes things," Margaret admitted, her voice faltering as she glanced at Claire, who sat frozen, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. "It does," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, leaning forward slightly. "Your client committed financial fraud, engaged in well-documented adultery, and breached her fiduciary duty as my spouse. She's not getting half of anything." Rachel slid another document forward, her tone matter-of-fact. "We're proposing Ms. Monroe walks away with her personal belongings, her car, and a one-time payment of $30,000. In exchange, she signs a full release of all claims against Mr. Carter, his business, and his property. She has 1 week to vacate the house." Claire's head snapped up, her voice trembling with disbelief. $30,000? That's it? After 10 years of marriage? Her green eyes brimmed with tears, but Ethan's expression didn't soften, his resolve as unyielding as the steel he'd worked with for years. "You want it out, Claire?" he said, his voice a quiet storm. "You planned to take everything I built while you were sneaking around with Nathan. You don't get to play the victim now." Margaret tried to interject, but Rachel cut her off, her voice firm. "The alternative is a public divorce trial where all of this, every text, every transfer, becomes part of the record. I don't think your client wants that kind of exposure." Claire's tears spilled over, her hands shaking as she realized the depth of her miscalculation. The life she'd thrown away now slipping through her fingers like sand. A week later, against Rachel's advice, Ethan agreed to a face-to-face meeting with Claire at Bella Vita, the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. A place once filled with laughter and love, now a battleground for closure. Ethan arrived early, nursing a glass of red wine at a corner table, the dim candlelight casting shadows on his face as he watched the door. Claire walked in, her auburn hair loose, her green eyes red-rimmed, wearing a simple black dress that made her look smaller, more fragile than he remembered. To his surprise, Nathan trailed behind her, a tall, wiry man with dark hair and a smug grin, his silver Jeep keys dangling from his hand. "Ethan," Claire said, her voice soft as she sat down, Nathan taking the seat beside her, his arm resting possessively on the back of her chair. "This is Nathan. I thought you should meet him." Ethan's blue eyes flicked to Nathan, his expression unreadable, then back to Claire. "You wanted to talk, so talk," he said, his tone flat, his fingers tightening around the stem of his glass. Claire swallowed hard, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I wanted to explain why things happen this way. I wasn't happy, Ethan. You were always working, always gone. Nathan. He understood me. Nathan smirked, leaning forward. Look, man, no one meant for this to happen. Sometimes people just connect, you know? Ethan's gaze shifted to Nathan, slow and deliberate, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Did I ask for your opinion? Nathan blinked, his smirk faltering, and looked to Claire for support. But she was too busy staring at her hands, her voice trembling as she continued. It wasn't all bad between us, Ethan. I needed more. Ethan took a slow sip of his wine, setting the glass down with a soft clink, his blue eyes piercing through her. More? You had everything, Claire. A home, a husband who loved you, a life we built together. You didn't need more, you wanted different. And now you've got it. He leaned back, his voice steady but laced with a quiet fury. But here's something you didn't expect. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. You showed me who you really are before I wasted another decade on you. Nathan snorted, his arrogance returning. Grateful? Your wife's leaving you, and you're grateful? That's pathetic. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, he slid a piece of paper across the table, his voice cold as ice. Not as pathetic as your credit score, Nathan. I had a friend at the bank look into you. Your application for that fancy Seattle apartment? Denied. Turns out you can't even afford the deposit without Claire's income. Good luck with your new life. Claire's head snapped toward Nathan, her green eyes wide with shock. What? You said it was approved. Nathan's face flushed, his bravado crumbling as he stammered. I was going to fix it, babe. But Claire was already on her feet, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. You lied to me. After everything I gave up for you. She turned to Ethan, her voice a desperate plea. Ethan, I made a mistake. Can we just... Ethan stood, towering over her, his blue eyes hard as stone. No, Claire. You made your choice. Now live with it. He dropped a $20 bill on the table and walked out, leaving Claire sobbing in Nathan's arms, her dream of a new life shattering around her. While Ethan stepped into the cool Boise night, a man who just reclaimed his future, stronger and freer than ever before. The Boise night was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallowed the stars. As a late November storm rolled in, the wind howling through the trees and rattling the windows of Ethan Carter's Craftsman home. Inside, the house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Where Ethan sat at the table, his sandy blonde hair illuminated by the glow of a single lamp, his blue eyes scanning a stack of invoices for Carter Electric. At 41, Ethan had spent the past month reclaiming his life after Claire's betrayal, moving her belongings to the guest room and preparing for her final move out. His heart hardened, but his resolve stronger than ever. Claire had been staying in the guest room since their confrontation at Bella Vita, her auburn hair often tied back in a messy bun, her green eyes red from crying, her once confident demeanor replaced by a hollow shell of regret. She'd begged to stay until she found a new place, and Ethan, against his better judgment, had agreed, but only until the end of the week. It was now Thursday night, and the tension in the house was palpable, a storm brewing inside as fierce as the one outside. Around 1 a.m., a loud crash shattered the silence, the sound of glass breaking echoing from the back of the house, near Ethan's home office where he kept his business records. Ethan's head snapped up, his heart pounding as he grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, his work-honed instincts kicking in. He moved swiftly through the darkened hallway, his boots silent on the hardwood floor, the beam of light cutting through the shadows as he approached the office door. There, climbing through the shattered window, was Nathan, his dark hair soaked from the rain, his eyes wild with a mix of anger and desperation, a crowbar in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. Where is she? Nathan slurred, his voice thick with alcohol as he stumbled into the room, glass crunching under his boots, his silver Jeep keys dangling from his belt loop. Ethan stood his ground, his 6 feet 2 inches frame blocking the doorway, his blue eyes narrowing as he assessed the threat. Get out of my house, Nathan, he warned, his voice low and steady. the flashlight beam steady on Nathan's face, illuminating the flush of drunken rage. Nathan laughed, a bitter, unhinged sound, and took a step forward, the crowbar swinging loosely in his hand. Not without Claire. She took my keys, man. She's mine, not yours. He lunged clumsily, the whiskey bottle slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor, the sharp scent of alcohol mixing with the rain-soaked air. Ethan sidestepped easily, years of working on construction sites giving him the reflexes of a man who dodged falling beams and live wires. He grabbed Nathan's arm, using his momentum to slam him against the wall, the crowbar clattering to the ground as Nathan grunted in pain. Last warning? Ethan growled, pinning Nathan there, his forearm pressed against the man's chest, his blue eyes burning with a controlled fury. Nathan struggled, his breath hot with whiskey, and then, in a sudden move, pulled a pocket knife from his jacket, the blade glinting in the flashlight's beam. "Back off, or I'll gut you," he snarled, slashing wildly as Ethan released him and stepped back, his heart racing but his mind clear. Claire appeared in the doorway, her auburn hair disheveled, her green eyes wide with terror as she screamed, "Nathan, stop!" But Nathan was beyond reason. Lunging again, the knife aimed at Ethan's chest. Ethan caught his wrist midair, twisting hard until the knife fell to the floor with a metallic clank, then delivered a single, solid punch to Nathan's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground, unconscious before he even hit the hardwood. "Call the police," Ethan ordered Claire, his voice steady as he kept his boot firmly on Nathan's chest, ensuring he wouldn't get up. Claire fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911, her voice trembling as she explained the break-in, the knife, the assault. Within minutes, the sound of sirens pierced the stormy night, red and blue lights flashing through the broken window as Boise police officers stormed into the house. They found Nathan still out cold, the knife and crowbar on the floor, the whiskey bottle in pieces, and Ethan standing over him, his blue eyes calm but unyielding. "He broke in, attacked me with a knife," Ethan explained, his voice even as the officers cuffed Nathan, who was starting to come to, groaning in pain. Claire, still in her pajamas, her face streaked with tears, confirmed everything, her voice barely above a whisper. He was going to hurt Ethan. I saw the knife." The officers took Nathan away in handcuffs, charging him with breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted burglary, his drunken threats of revenge against Ethan now a matter of record. As the police car drove off into the rain, Claire turned to Ethan, her green eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and guilt, her hands still trembling. "Ethan, you saved me. After everything I did to you," she said, her voice breaking as she reached for his arm. Ethan stepped back, his expression hard, the storm outside mirroring the one in his heart. "I didn't save you, Claire. I protected my home. Don't confuse the two." He turned away, heading to the kitchen to grab a broom and start cleaning up the glass, leaving Claire standing in the hallway, her sobs echoing through the house as the reality of her choices, and their consequences, hit her harder than the storm ever could. The next morning, the break-in made the local news. The headline, "Boise electrician fends off drunken intruder," spreading through the small town like wildfire, turning Ethan into an unexpected hero. While Claire faced the wreckage of her decisions, alone and broken in the home she'd soon have to leave. The crisp spring air of Boise carried the scent of blooming lilacs and freshly turned earth as Ethan Carter stood on the site of his latest project, a new community library in the heart of downtown, the late April sun casting a warm glow on his sandy blonde hair, his blue eyes reflecting a quiet pride. At 42, Ethan had spent the past 6 months rebuilding his life after Claire's betrayal, his hands calloused from years of electrical work now guiding Carter Electric to new heights. The library project, a $2 million contract, was the biggest his company had ever landed, a testament to his resilience and the trust the town had in him after the news of Nathan's break-in had turned him into a local hero. The construction site buzzed with activity, workers in hard hats shouting orders, the hum of machinery mixing with the laughter of kids playing in a nearby park, the kind of scene that reminded Ethan why he loved his work, why he'd fought so hard to protect it. Claire had moved out the day after Nathan's arrest, her auburn hair tied back in a messy ponytail, her green eyes hollow as she packed the last of her things into a rented U-Haul, leaving the house keys on the kitchen counter as Ethan had instructed. She'd barely spoken, her voice a whisper when she said, "I'm sorry, Ethan," before driving away, her black dress a stark contrast to the vibrant spring around her. Ethan had watched her go from the porch, his heart a mix of relief and a faint ache for the woman he'd once loved. But he didn't linger on the past. He'd spent the months since throwing himself into work, repainting the house in a soft gray, replacing the nursery mural Claire had painted with a simple bookshelf, turning the space into a home that was his alone. On this particular morning, as Ethan reviewed blueprints with his foreman, Mark, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the site, Claire, standing by a chain-link fence, her auburn hair now a natural brown, her designer clothes replaced by a simple denim jacket and jeans, a far cry from the woman who'd once swept into rooms like she owned them. She worked at a local bookstore now, a job she'd taken to make ends meet, her green eyes watching the construction with a mix of awe and regret. Ethan caught her gaze, his expression unreadable, and after a moment, he excused himself from Mark and walked over, his work boots kicking up dust as he approached. "Looks like it's coming along," Claire said softly, her voice tinged with sadness as she gestured to the library, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "It'll be done by fall," Ethan replied, his tone neutral, his blue eyes studying her face, noticing the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the absence of the emerald pendant he'd given her years ago. "What brings you here, Claire?" She took a deep breath, her green eyes meeting his with a vulnerability he hadn't seen in years. "Nathan's getting out next month," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He got 9 months for the break-in and assault, but his cousin works at the bookstore with me. He said Nathan's been talking about settling scores when he's released. Specifically with you." Ethan's jaw tightened, his mind flashing back to that stormy night, the glint of Nathan's knife, the sound of Claire's scream, but he didn't let the fear show. "Thanks for the heads up," he said, his voice steady, his hands in his pockets as he glanced at the workers behind him. "I'll handle it." Claire's brow furrowed, her green eyes filled with worry. "That's what I'm afraid of, Ethan. He's dangerous, he's not stable. You don't know what he's capable of." Ethan's gaze hardened, his voice low but firm. "I know exactly what he's capable of, Claire. I also know what I'm capable of. I've got 20 families depending on me to keep this company running, to keep their livelihoods secure. I'm not letting some ex-con with a grudge mess that up." He turned to walk away, but Claire's voice stopped him, her tone desperate. "Ethan, wait. I need to say something else." He paused, looking back at her, his expression guarded. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," she said, her voice breaking as tears welled in her eyes, her hands clenching the fence. "I had everything with you. A home, a partner, a future. And I threw it away for someone who never cared about me. I see you now, building this library, building a life, and I can't believe I let it all go." Ethan's heart softened for a moment, the memory of their early years flashing through his mind. Their first dance at the Boise River Festival, the way she'd laugh at his terrible jokes. But he pushed the memories aside, his resolve firm. "You made your choice, Claire," he said quietly, his blue eyes steady. "I made mine. I'm not the man I was when you left, and I'm not going back." He walked back to the site, leaving Claire standing by the fence, her tears falling silently as she watched him go, the man she'd underestimated now stronger than ever. That evening, Ethan met Emily Harper, a local architect who'd been working with him on the library project, for coffee at a small cafe on Main Street. Emily, with her warm brown eyes and easy smile, had become a bright spot in Ethan's life over the past few months. Their conversations about design and construction evolving into something deeper, something real. As they sat across from each other, sharing a laugh over a story about a botched blueprint, Ethan felt a lightness he hadn't known in years, a sense of hope that the future held more than just the pain of the past. Across the street, Claire watched from her bookstore window, her green eyes filled with a quiet sorrow as she saw Ethan smile, a smile she'd once taken for granted, now given to someone who deserved it more, a painful reminder of the life she'd lost and the man she'd never truly known. The late September sun bathed Boise in a golden glow, the air crisp with the first hints of fall as Ethan Carter stood on the steps of the newly completed downtown community library, a proud smile on his sandy blonde face, his blue eyes reflecting the joy of a hard-won victory. At 42, Ethan had transformed over the past year, his life no longer defined by the betrayal that had once threatened to break him. The library, a sleek modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop garden, was a symbol of his resilience, its grand opening drawing a crowd of locals who clapped and cheered as Ethan cut the ribbon, his navy blazer crisp against the autumn backdrop, his hands steady from years of electrical work now holding the oversized scissors with confidence. Carter Electric had flourished under his leadership, the library project cementing its reputation as a cornerstone of the Boise community. And Ethan had become a respected figure in town, his name synonymous with grit and integrity after the story of Nathan's break-in had spread. Inside the library, as guests mingled over punch and cookies, Ethan stood by a display of architectural plans, chatting with Emily Harper, the architect who'd become his partner in more ways than one. Emily, with her warm brown eyes and a laugh that lit up the room, stood close to him, her hand brushing his as they shared a quiet moment amidst the celebration. Her presence a steady anchor in Ethan's new life. They'd been dating for 6 months, their relationship built on mutual respect and a shared love for creating things that lasted, whether it was a building or a future together. Emily had brought a lightness to Ethan's days, her thoughtful gestures, like bringing him coffee on early mornings at the site, or leaving little sketches of their favorite Boise spots on his desk, reminding him what it felt like to be truly seen, truly valued. Across town, Claire Monroe stood outside the library, her auburn hair now a muted brown, her green eyes watching the celebration from a distance, her denim jacket doing little to shield her from the autumn chill. She'd spent the past year piecing her life back together, working long hours at the bookstore and living in a modest one-bedroom apartment near the edge of Boise, a far cry from the craftsman home she'd once shared with Ethan. Nathan had been released from prison 3 months ago, his 9-month sentence for the break-in and assault reduced for good behavior, and Claire had cut all ties with him after learning of his continued lies, his promises of a new life in Seattle nothing more than empty words. She'd heard through mutual friends that Nathan had taken a job at a warehouse on the outskirts of town, his threats against Ethan fading into the background as he tried to rebuild his own life, a small mercy in the chaos Claire had created. As the crowd applauded Ethan's speech, his voice carrying over the speakers with a quiet strength, Claire felt a pang of regret so sharp it stole her breath, her hands clenching the strap of her bag as she watched him, the man she'd once called hers, now standing taller than ever. "I had it all," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling as tears welled in her green eyes, her reflection in a nearby shop window showing a woman aged by her choices, her once vibrant spirit dulled by the weight of what she'd lost. A home, a husband who loved me, a life I could have been proud of, and I threw it away for nothing. She thought back to the early days with Ethan, their first date at Bella Vita, the way he'd look at her like she was the only person in the world, the dreams they'd shared of a family, a future, and the memory felt like a knife, twisting deeper with every cheer from the crowd. Ethan, meanwhile, stepped down from the podium, his blue eyes catching Emily's as she smiled at him, her pride in him evident in the way she squeezed his hand, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold emptiness Claire had left behind. He'd heard about Nathan's release, but he wasn't worried. Ethan had taken precautions, installing a security system at his home and keeping tabs on Nathan through mutual contacts, ensuring his new life remained untouched by the past. As the celebration continued, Ethan and Emily slipped away to the rooftop garden, the city of Boise stretching out below them, the mountains in the distance glowing under the setting sun. "You did it," Emily said, her voice soft as she leaned against the railing, her brown eyes sparkling with admiration. "This library, it's going to change lives, Ethan." He smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years, his hand finding hers as he looked out at the horizon. "We did it," he corrected, his voice warm with gratitude, his blue eyes reflecting a future he could finally believe in. "And it's just the beginning." Back on the street, Claire turned away from the library, her green eyes brimming with tears as she walked toward her apartment. the sound of the celebration fading behind her, a painful reminder of the life she'd had and the man she'd lost. Ethan, standing on the rooftop with Emily by his side, felt the weight of the past lift completely, his heart free, his spirit unburdened, a man who'd turned betrayal into triumph, ready to embrace whatever came next with the strength he'd fought so hard to reclaim.